Ghost stared at the large screen in front of him, with serious eyes and a cold countenance beneath his mask. Wesker had finally been spotted, and his hideout was very well indeed, in the heart of the Amazon rainforest. Apparently he had managed to turn a remote area into his own private laboratory, surrounded by EMP protection. Well, technically he killed whatever organization owned the place and made modifications. It became a small fortress. No wonder why it took him so long to find him. The mission will be extremely important and the utmost secrecy. 4 of our teams will get off the helicopters and set on foot. Each take at least a kilometer away. This is at the closest we can get without being detected, Hunk explained ahead, interacting with the 3D map of the terrain in question. Alpha A will go north near the river, Alpha B to the west, Alpha C to the east, and Alpha D from the south. And I and 3 other teams will be monitoring in the air, waiting for your signal, Hunk said, interacting with the 3D map showing the model of the vehicles. We do have a good arsenal due to our suppliers, and there's more to come. The vehicles are prone to change. We have a very important project, depending on how it develops. The plan on any may change in the future. However, for now, it's what it is. You're dismissed, Hunk said to a few people in the room, and they began to leave. Ghost remained there for a few more moments, and after a brief nod to his partner, he left the room, with slow, calm steps. Ignoring a few curious looks, he walked through the corridors of the BSAA. As he walked, he brought someone to the hand back of his neck, massaging it lightly. It was rather curious of how he worked. Only 3 days without the training, he felt anxious, restless even, sore on some unusual places. He urgently needed some training. Sighing slightly, he made his way to the private training wing. As he entered, he ran his eyes around and heard low noises coming from deep inside the Gay Academy. Considering a few people were allowed in there, he had a few possible encounters in the moment. Heading for the Causelastics area, he briefly observed the light-eyed woman who was hitting the local punching bag hard. The agent had cracked the bones of his hands as he watched. She had good footwork. Her brows were strong and fast and precise. She was a good fighter, with a few predictable or unnecessary movements. Memories of his conversation with her returned to his mind, along with the looks she sent him while he was doing that interview. Sighing, he pushed these thoughts along the side and shook his head and walked across the room, catching the eye of the woman who had surely heard him just before he had entered the gym. "Little Redfield, I thought you were in a meeting with TerraSave," Ghost said as he approached, running his eyes over the equipment around him and setting up his training moment. "Meeting? More like a 10-minute chat and an email. No, but I'm heading out on operation in a few days' time. Quite an important one, apparently. So I decided to do a little bit of preparation," she said, hitting her hands against each other before landing another blow on top of the punching bag. "Well, don't get in your way then," he said, starting to begin to stretch. However, he could feel the woman's gaze on his back. He knew he wasn't free from the confrontation. He didn't really want to meet her because he knew he would be confronted, but the sooner he dealt with it, the quicker he would be free. "How are you?" she asked, to the surprise of the slight confusion of the agent, who glanced at her. "I'm fine, Redfield," he said, and she snorted with some irritation. "I thought we were past that," she said, and looked at her suggestive eyes, making her sigh slightly. "Leon, there's no one here. You don't have to be so worried of me. It's just Claire," she said. It was his turn to sigh slightly. "I'm still not used to that." That was all he said before removing his mask and putting it in his pocket. Claire stared at his face for a few moments, much to the hidden by his messy long hair. "Why did you leave your hair like that?" he asked. With a small amused smile on her face, Ghost for his part just shrugged. "It annoys my boss, or at least, it used to," he replied. The woman slowly moved away from the punching bag, approaching the agent with slow, even careful steps, as if she was on a certain hesitation of her movements. "You know about the interview? How much did you really say?" she asked, and he blinked a few times, slightly confused. "What do you mean?" he asked. She ran a hand down her neck, apparently uncertain. You've been hiding things. That's obvious. I feel that there's something much deeper in what you said, she replied, crossing her arms in front of her and staring at him, waiting for an answer. Ghost, for his part, sighed a little. He knew that Claire had taken a keen eye and was very clever. He just didn't want to think he'd be having his conversation so soon. So what are you doing now as your journalistic side, trying to get a bit more information out of me? He asked, without venom in his voice or an incriminating tone, and Claire just shook her head. Not exactly. I said in that room that this information will be important for the new generation of fighters against bioterrorism. You never know when a new group will emerge or an outbreak will happen. Even with your efforts, every piece of information, no matter how small, will be useful for these organizations, she explained, and Ghost put some thick chains around her neck and started doing some exercises on the bar. The first set went quickly. With a slight gasp, he let himself fall to the ground and turned to the woman, adjusting the chains around his neck, but not taking them off. It wasn't a crucial information. It won't change, he replied, and the woman leaned her weight on her leg. Okay, so just take a curiosity. The deaths of some subjects, no matter how innocent the blood, didn't seem to come so easily to you. I could see in your eyes, she argued, and he snorted. I didn't even break a sweat. Easier said on that. If only the subjects had killed themselves, he replied, and she shook her head in denial. Maybe easier for the agent, she said, and Ghost bit the side of his mouth slightly. She was good. He lowered his head in an instant, jumped into the bar, staring down into his exercises. It was like sleeping. He gasped as he raised his body above the bar. I just closed my eyes, and when I woke up, my hands were numb, and it was only then that the weight fell on my back, he confessed, finishing another set and gasping slightly as he landed. They were children. All of them. The ones I mentioned to you a while ago. The oldest must have been 10, 12 at the most. The mutation had deformed their bodies, but they were still just children. And I had to watch them murder each other before I put an end to it, he finished, and jumped again towards another bar, suspending his body above the ground while getting into a human flag position with extreme ease. Claire blinked a few times. He had mentioned it, but at the time, his voice had been almost as cold as ice. His blue eyes were unfeeling, as if those of a human creature. The woman opened her mouth a few times, but no sound came out. She had been in similar scenes before, children and young people falling victim to bioterrorist attacks, but she hadn't reached that point yet, of having to pull the trigger on them. Fuck, Leon, she said in a low, weak voice, as the agent began to climb up the bar with subtle movements, as if the body or the chain around his neck was weighing nothing. Whatever that is, he said, letting himself fall from the considerable height and landing softly. Considering the weight from his pocket, he took out his mask. For this mask, it was easy. It was just pointing the gun and pulling the trigger. As easy as breathing. Without it, I'd hesitate. Maybe I wouldn't make it. And that's the dilemma, he said, going a little further than he imagined. But there was no point in going against it. Claire and Sherry already knew. Chris knew. The heads of the bioterrorism knew. Hell, even the frickin' president knew who he was. What was the point of hiding that man behind the mask? Have you ever thought of maybe that time has passed? She asked, drawing the agent's attention to her. Leon, soldiers have a hard time adapting to the normal world after the war. They have to remember that they're not at war anymore. That's the first step in getting better, she explained, approaching with slow, short steps, as if they didn't really want to scare him or anything. That would be humiliating, actually. It was a bit humiliating, but the agent knew how to swallow his pride sometimes. Maybe it's time you remember that time has passed. You're a known name now. Everyone's afraid of you. Hell, you've come so far as to impose your wishes on the frickin' president. Maybe it's time to start believing that the battle's over and you didn't need that mask anymore. Your role is close to being fulfilled, she said, and the man caught himself thinking, his eyes running across the floor as his mind had digested her words. I think the last time I checked, you were in the automotive engineering, not psychologically, he said, placing the chains on the floor and tossing his arms around his waist with a slightly amused look on his face. I didn't know you had this psychologist's side to you. The woman smiled, matching the light and mood and shrugging. I was around soldiers long enough to learn a thing or two, she said, arching a single eyebrow. Like, for example, knowing that you need to cut that hair. Seriously, it's pretty big. Lucky you're not a member of the BSAA. Chris would kill you. The man snorted in ignorance, waving his hand in the air dismissively. Somehow I doubt that, he said, and Claire rolled her eyes. Ah, ignorance. You thinking you're untouchable, are you? She said, approaching in short strides, but he just shrugged. Nothing against your brother, of course. He's very skilled, but he's just... He was interrupted from the punch of the woman. He dodged and the seconds. Taking a deep breath, he watched as Claire sidled more with serious eyes, and the smile on her face had slowly disappeared. Don't you dare dodge, you owe me, she said, her tone laden with more serious words. Confused Leon watched her next blow, but made no mention of deflecting on it, only gritting his teeth when he felt her fist on her stomach. She hit hard even though she was holding back. Being slightly bent over, he felt Claire's hand on the other in his back and just glanced at her. That was for everything. The lies, the secrets, everything, she said, bringing her other hand up to the man's face, pulling his own hair away from his eyes. But at the same time, I thank you for everything you've done for me, Leon. For me and Sherry. What you have done is something that I don't even have the words to describe. I have to be content that I'll never be able to repay you back for what you've done, the woman said, her words very convoying with her feelings, in the soft-toned, sympathetic eyes. Leon looked away. He couldn't look at her for long without the feeling strange. He strengthened his posture and sighed slightly, swallowing some saliva. There's no need, Claire. Don't dwell on it, I told you. There's no point in thinking about it, he said. As soon as his eyes met hers again, he felt her squeeze his arm a little tighter. She looked at him with a strange glint in her eyes, but with determination that found her curious. Why did you do that? She asked, from a serious tone. He could tell that she was looking for an answer from the different one he already given. I already told you why, he said, and she snorted a little in some smile and disbelief. Yes, you did, but I can't help but wondering, being able to do that kind of thing, what are we to you? Her question caught him off guard as he admitted, and was still looking at him in an intensive way that he knew she wouldn't be able to let him leave without an answer. He could leave if he wanted to, but he didn't want to fight, especially not with her. What? He asked, trying to buy a little more time, while his inside screamed. His pride was being confronted, and his very professional side was in chaos when he realized that Claire knew that she got him cornered. Your senses of justice was very strong, and it still is, but still, I kept thinking. However briefly, we have a certain history, and out of curiosity perhaps, how did you really feel? How did you really see Sherry and me? She asked, ducking her head slightly as she waited for an answer. The man for his part blinked a few times, a little disoriented perhaps. This was a subject definitely he hadn't thought about in years, and it certainly has been that long. Even he was beginning to wonder. Claire was a good woman, in fact great, and in some time he found himself wrapped in her little finger in a matter of hours, as he threw himself in and admitted, at the police station, he had been interested in her. But he stopped thinking about it. He stopped thinking about the passion he had developed so quickly, and that before he could even process it, it had evolved into something more. He buried those thoughts, feelings and anxieties deep down. As for Sherry, it was obvious that it was a protective feeling, but he no longer had any idea what it was. It wasn't exactly the same way he had felt about his sister, the proactive way he had cared for her, but it was similar. And for the first time in a long time, he had no idea how to answer that question. But Miss Luck was on her side, so he didn't have to answer. Footsteps were heard right behind him, and they both turned to Sherry, who opened her eyes wide, and she saw him standing there. Her eyes moved in a certain frenzy, curiosity, alternating between Claire's hands, the way they were close to each other and their features. I'm sorry to disturb you. I guess, what, when? She didn't know exactly what to ask, and stumbled over a few steps as she tried to organize her thoughts. It's okay, Sherry. We just talked a little while ago. You're not in the way, Claire said, taking just one step away from the man, who was recovering from his initial shock. Sherry still nodded, somewhat questioningly, and hurried closer. Well, they could both see that she seemed excited. You finally talked! That's wonderful! And the way you look, I'd say you're on good terms, she said, almost celebratory, and her eyes focused on Leon. See, I told you you should have listened to me from the start, she said, and the man just shrugged. There still are a few things, but we're good, Claire said. I don't care about the details at all. I'm just glad you're talking again. No secrets now, and I finally won't have to hide it from you, Sherry said, raising both hands in the air. You need a haircut. Later, Leon replied. Who cut your hair? Sherry asked. Me, Leon replied. Really? Well, if you want, I could cut it for you, Sherry offered, and the agent arched an eyebrow. I appreciate that, but I still have training to do later, he said, returning to his gaze into his training before either of them could make further comments. Lowering his head slightly, Leon watched as a few strands of hair fell across his cloak cover-up. Behind him, Sherry hummed softly in her ears as her hands ran gently over the man's head. When was the first time you've had a haircut? She asked, and from the tone of her voice, he could tell that she was enjoying this more than she could. No idea. About 2-3 months, I think, he replied, raising his head again, looking himself at the small mirror in front of him. The way you describe it, I'm surprised you had time for this, she said, and he snorted in disgust. A little moments of rest, I could tell you that, he replied. Where did you learn to cut hair? From Claire, who in turn cut Chris's hair when she was younger, she said, with a small smile appearing on her lips. That reminds me when I cut of Barry's hair. Leon arched an eyebrow slightly. Barry Burton? Yes, that's him. Do you know him? She paused for a moment, shaking her head slightly, and she rolled her eyes softly. What a stupid question. Of course you know about him. Relax, it's not like I'm watching other people's lives. I just know this involvement with Chris. And I know he's retired, Leon said. And Claire and Sherry just looked at the mirror, who was now running her hand through his hair with some kind of cream. That was new. Retired? Tell him that, she said, lowering her arms and looking at him through the mirror. They both stared at each other for a few moments until a broad smile slowly formed on her lips. Look at that beautiful face. You look like someone else. Leon made an amused grimace, which made Sherry point a teasing finger at him and point, out her sticking her tongue. What's the cream on the side? He asked, watching the girl take a lock of his hair and cut it with the scissors. Hair cream. Your hair, it's beautiful as it is. It is very dry, she said, and Leon blinked a few times, his expression somewhat incredulous. There he was, killer of hordes and infected and hunter of bioterrorists. He used to eat superhumans for breakfast. Now here he was, conversation about his hair. Are you serious? Sherry arched an eyebrow. Yes, about... It's just a hair. Oh, did you get your pride hurt by that? There's nothing wrong with a little vanity, and even for men. What? There's a lot wrong with it. It's just a silly concern. It's just hair. Vanity is... Come on, you've been blessed with great hair. You know many women would kill for hair like yours? And you want to waste that gift? No, sir. And you don't look at me like that, she said, combing his hair with gentle movements, and then put the utensils to one side. Finished look at the hairstyle. Seriously, Leon, it would be a crime for you to wear a mask. You're one hell of a man. The girl said with the expression that was a mixture of amusement and seriousness. Taking 2 steps to the side, she leaned on his shoulder, placing her other hand on her waist. Look at you, maybe even like a totally different person. Claire would love it. The comment you had made about the man who looked at her with a confused expression, and she just tried to give him a smile, pretending to be misunderstood. What? Do you really think I didn't see the way you looked at each other? Or the other way she touched you? Please try and lie to yourself, but not to me. Leon rolled his eyes and stood up, and the girl looked to the side, removed his cloak and placed it on the chair he was sitting on. After recent events and the loss she had suffered not so long ago, I'm surprised you thought of that. There's nothing wrong between Claire and me, Leon said, taking a few steps closer to the mirror and looking at his reflection. His hair was shorter than it had been in years, similar to the haircut he had before he went to Raccoon, but a little longer perhaps. The look wasn't so that bad. A small part from his sides, but it was shaved, but was at his back. Both were covered by most of his hair. Maybe not, but it doesn't mean there won't be something in the future, right? She asked, making him look with her slightly wide eyes. Sherry remained motionless, somewhat anxious, even hopeful expression on her face. The man sighed and straightened his posture. Why are you asking that? He asked, and a slight smile escaped on her lips, and the girl turned to the sink and washed her hands. Well, maybe because she's single, and as far as I know, so are you. Maybe you might be good for each other. Hell, if I remembered, you so much liked each other, she explained, turning to him after drying her hands. Don't you think about that now? Well, your big mission, is it approaching? Her question joined Claire's words in mind, and once again he found himself confronted by the thoughts he had long vowed to keep buried. Jesus, what happened to you over the years? Such nice words of advice, he said, and Sherry gave him a mischievous smile. Leon, we work for the Humanitarian Services Organization, including human rights to protect psychological care. Of course we know something about people like you. Despite the larger proportions, you're still a soldier, she explained, and the man crossed his arms in front of his chest. So you see me as just another soldier with PTSD? Not exactly. We care about our parents and we care about you in a different way from them, but the methods won't change from you to them. Nobody goes through what you went through is fine, Leon. It's impossible. You shouldn't be considered human if you were like that. Leon looked away and swallowed some saliva. Well, a professional point of view, it made sense. I appreciate the concern, but Wesker's still alive. I can't keep occupying my mind with mundane thoughts. Maybe all of this was over, we can have a better chat. Ah, so you'll be around when it's over? She asked mischievously, her smile even wide on her face. Leon just looked at her suggestively, and she held her hands up. Okay, whoever said that isn't anyone here anymore, she said, waving to him before they left the bathroom. You know you should be a model, Sherry said, and Leon grimaced. Not a chance. Why not? Are you kidding me? No, you'd have a great career. Posing in front of assholes pointing cameras at me? And what's the problem? You saved those assholes. Being treated like a doll? Well, you look like one. The hell? Haha, I'm joking. Or was I? You better be. And so what are you gonna do now? Something you won't like, and the Great Red Shield won't be there to save you. Oh, good. You have gone too far on that one. Ha, so you remember. How could I forget? It was the first time I saw the two of you, only much cuter. Now you're all macho. Well, you still have the bad jokes. Well, what can I say? I'm like a plant, and that's good at math. What? I have square roots. Jesus Christ. Hey, that's a good one. No, it ain't. Yes, you do have good taste. I disagree. Shit, you look like an Italian chef. Who? Italian chief who died, unfortunately. He passed away. Oh, you know what? Shut up. Come on, that was one of my best. Ghost put on his ACC honey badger on his back, his silver trusty silver ghost in his holster on his right thigh, and the desert eagle on his left thigh. In his tactical vest, plenty of ammunition to small take an army. Positive thinking, he knew. No matter how much ammunition he carried, it always seemed to run out of it in the blink of an eye. His communicator beeped, and he brought it up to his hand to his ear. Hunk, how are things? He asked his partner, tucking some grenades into his military belt. We're closing in. It's confirmed he's in the area, his partner said, and Ghost arched an eyebrow under his mask. Did you manage to find the signal? I thought he hidden everything in this map with the EMP equipment, he said, picking up his trusty hookshot and leaving the small tent he was in, walking towards the helicopter ahead, where Mike was already turning it on and the rest of his team were getting ready. He wasn't prepared for this corrupt money, Hunk said, and Ghost snorted in mild amusement. "You seem to be enjoying yourself," he said, watching the figure dressed in military clothes and a tactical vest approach him with a pistol in his holster and a bag on his back. "You should see this little toy that Simons has financed. It's perfectly for stealthy approach," Hunk said, and Ghost sighed, shaking his body slightly. "When this is over, take me for a ride," he said, nodding over to Mike, who waited for the figure to move. "Are you asking me out on a date, soldier?" Hunk asked. "Only if you're holding hands," Ghost replied as they laughed briefly. "Waiting for you, over," Hunk said, and Ghost crossed his arms in front of his chest when the figure got close enough. "May I ask where you're going?" he asked, and Claire quickly shrugged, ignoring him for a few moments and putting the backpack on her back and inside the helicopter. "What does it look like?" "I'm coming with you," she said, and Ghost for his part remained serious, his arms still crossed in front of his chest. "Who says?" Claire sighed in mild irritation. "I did. Remember that big mission I mentioned? I kinda have a big story here. The investigation's going on for years. Albert Wesker's a name everyone knows, and everyone hates, and everyone wants him dead. I'm not going to miss the chance to document his operation," she explained, and Ghost slowly watched the woman enter the helicopter. He didn't like that, firstly because of although he had already suspected it, she hadn't said anything, and as far as he knew, she hadn't talked to Hunk about it. A civilian in operation, although possible, was something that considered it discussed beforehand. Secondly, because he cared. With a sigh, he entered the helicopter and signaled for Mike to take off, when picked up a headset of his own and sat down, glancing at the woman. "So that's a camera in your backpack? I didn't know you'd become a reporter," he said, and she looked at him with a slightly arched eyebrow. "I haven't, but with being high-ranked member of TerraSave, it would be a waste not to," she said, settling into her seat. "Look, I'm not looking to go into fight or get in the way, okay? Just documenting. Think of me as part of the landscape," she said, and he snapped those bones in his fingers. "Sherry, she's with Alpha C team, and a few other members are Alpha B and A. You should know you've told me before, didn't you?" he said, and he stared at him with a tense gleam in her eyes and a small wicked smile on her lips. "Why do you think I asked for that kind of training?" she asked, and he was silent for a few moments, until he sighed and leaned back on his seat. "Besides, you're the genius here. I thought you figured it out." "Of course," the man muttered to himself. Ghost ran his eyes over the dense forest below. The Amazon was really beautiful, just as beautiful as the other times he had seen it. But what was beautiful about the forest was also dangerous. Wild animals that ruled along the place before Wesker arrived, fatal diseases such as malaria and the rugged terrain consumed those who were insensitive. The agent threw down the rope and glanced at Claire. "That's it, Mike. If all goes well, I'll see you in a few hours," the agent said, and the pilot sent him a thumbs up. "I'll be waiting, sir. Good luck," Mike said, and the agent climbed down the rope. He quickly raised his rifle and checked his surroundings. The forest was dense and was difficult to move through. He would have to be very careful. Behind him, he heard Claire shortly afterwards, and the helicopter moved away. Raising an arm, he looked at the watch on his wrist. The device showed a 3D map of the surrounding area, as well as the location of each of his men and their heart rates. According to the information, the laboratory in which Wesker was hiding in was underground, beneath the indigenous tribe. Ghost snorted with annoyance. One of the increasingly few indigenous tribes not threatened by the industrial activity by the region, isolated far enough away to not be affected by the monitoring. Now unfortunately hit by a psychopath with a god complex. I don't have to say this, but stay close," Ghost said, glancing at Claire for a few moments. The woman nodded at him before setting the GoPro on her forehead and the camera strap around her shoulder. Suppressing a sigh, Ghost started walking, taking the lead. Stepping carefully, he runs his eyes around, then checks his watch again. The forest was so dense that it was easy to get lost. Not only that, getting lost in the Amazon forest was bad enough, but getting lost in the Amazon forest with infected animals was even worse. The place was simply home to thousands of wild animals. It was almost safe to say the least. At the moment, it was the most dangerous place in the world. "Alpha B, come in," his communicator beeped, confirming the encounter with the infected animals. A jaguar, infected for at least a few days, 50% bigger than the common ones, twice as strong. Ghost checked his watch again. Alpha B was 900 miles away from him, but the map showed a few points nearby, certainly infected animals. The nearest one was to their right, about 90 to 100 meters away. They continued on their way until one particular dot caught the agent's attention. Alpha B, listen. We found the microchips in the affected animals, his communicator beeped, and Ghost squinted as he saw the speed which the dot was approaching. Steadying his rifle, he focused his eyes in front of him, with signaling Claire to stay alert. Alpha B, repeat. We found microchips in these infected animals. His communicator beeped again, and the instant the man stopped talking, the large infected snake appeared in front of him. An anaconda clearly, but twice as big than normal. Its eyes were gray, its scales looked sharp, and there were streaks of running down its length. In its mouth, it's an animal, so disfigured and covered in blood that it was difficult to identify what it was. The creature was probably heading back to its lair when it found them. All things considered, it was probably just bad luck. Well, it wasn't exactly the problem. Quickly, Ghost fired a shot at the anaconda's head, which caused its large body to crawl backwards, while dropping the prey from its mouth. Careful, something's weird. Something is moving up below you. He heard hunk from his communicator, as if something had been activated. The whole ground began to shake. The huge snake advanced towards the agent, knocking him down some trees as it crawled. Ghost quickly ran towards the snake, and at the moment it lunged, leapt forward and slid across the ground, throwing its grenades as he did so. The snake crawled a few more meters, but the large grenade exploded in its body, throwing it a few meters upwards. Ghost pulled back his balance, but before he could get on top of the creature, the ground shook again. The loud sound of something breaking echoed through the forest. The ground seemed to move violently, causing the agent to kneel on the ground, hand on the dirt in an attempt to fall. The ground began to crack, and the part of the river began to open up. The water along the ground fell into the abyss below, which was slowly opening up. The infected creatures struggled. Both watched the large snake struggled on the ground as its head exploded in the cloud of blood. The ground opened up even more from the huge chasm that opened. Several crows flew out at great speed. A literal tornado from the crows formed in the groups of soldiers. "What the fuck?" one of the soldiers asked over the communicator, as they watched from the internal shock as the sky darkened due to so many birds flying together. "Fucking hell," Ghost muttered to himself, drawing Claire's attention to himself. "What?" she asked, and she just growled low. "Hunk, they're infected crows. The madman's planning to infect the whole area," he shouted through the communicator. "We're picking up movement from the Amazon River. He's not planning just to infect the region. He's planning on much more than that," Hunk said over the comm. Ghost stared at his watch, stuck with several dots on his screen, so many that they practically covered the 3D map. "Stick to the plan. Me and the rest of my team will try to deal with it," Hunk said. "So are you sure?" "Get on with the frickin' plan. I want Wesker dead. I'll deal with it," Hunk said, switching off his communicator shortly afterwards. "Holy shit," Ghost muttered again, trying to get his watch to work again. But as long as those crows stayed around, he was without his map. It was okay, he had memorized the route anyway. "Put that shit on. The Amazon River cuts through 3 countries. If the water gets infected, it could be the biggest disaster in history," Claire said. Ghost watched the snake's body for a few more moments. Then, he lifted his gaze to the still dark gray sky and finally focused his eyes on the woman in front of him. "Let's go." That's all he said, before turning and starting to run towards the laboratory.